Morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now in our 35th episode of 2024. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, our platinum sponsor, Fiber for Breakfast. So earlier this week, NTI released the proposed BEAD Alternative Broadband Technology Guidance. Alternative Broadband Technology Guidance. And comments are due to NTI by September 10th. So the NTI BEAD program has a strong preference for fiber. We all know that. And in extremely high cost to deploy locations, state broadband offices can consider proposals that use fixed wireless access. So fiber and fixed wireless access are defined by NTI as reliable broadband. So NTI goes on to define low Earth orbit satellites, Starlink, and unlicensed wireless as unreliable broadband. So in this recent proposal for alternative broadband technology guidance, NTI is now saying that in challenging locations, states can elect not to serve locations if an unreliable broadband service exists. And in areas where no service exists, the NTI is potentially opening the door for states to consider funding unreliable broadband technology. So this absolutely makes zero sense, and it really puts communities at risk of being left behind. And so the Fiber Broadband Association will certainly be filing comments and be very vocal on this proceeding. On a positive note, NTI continues to approve BEAD initial proposals, and there are now 36 states and territories with approved initial proposals. So they're in go mode, and we only have 20 approvals left to go. So things are in great shape. Otherwise, Washington's a little quiet this week because Congress is in recess and everybody's recovering from the Democratic National Convention last week. So we're now 2 weeks out from the next Fiber Connect regional workshop in Des Moines. That's going to be on Tuesday, September 10th. We hope to see you there. And after Des Moines, we're going to be in Panama City, Panama for our Latin America Fiber Connect. That's October 1st and 2nd. Then we'll be in Canada. Joe will be up there, Calgary, Alberta, on October 8th. And then we'll be doing our tribal broadband regional event in Albuquerque, New Mexico on November 7th. So please join us for as many of those as you can. It's going to be great. And that brings us to today's Fiber for Breakfast session. Our guest today is Joe Hickey, the president of PomeGran, who will be discussing fiber differently, rewriting the rules of fiber deployment and adoption. But before I formally introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce David Norris from the team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to once again thank our platinum. Please keep in mind, all participants are in listen-only mode today. To ask a question, please type it into the question box located within the control panel on the side of your screen. We will host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's session. This presentation is also being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours, and you can find that recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. Finally, at the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to do so. We really appreciate the input. And with that, I will pass things back over to Gary to once again introduce our panelists and get things started. Gary?
Thanks, David, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the president and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest was Ron Westfall, the research director for Futurium, who discussed his latest research in a session titled AI, Driving Fiber Deployment Transformation. And according to Ron's latest research, companies expect to enhance customer experience, reduce costs, improve employee productivity, improve network operations, and meet revenue targets with the use of artificial intelligence. So AI is going to be significantly driving up demand for fiber. So in short, Ron's saying that AI and fiber were meant for each other. So if you missed last week's session with Ron, you can go to our website and watch the replay. Today on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest today is Joe Hickey, the founder and CEO of Rock Networks and president of PomeGran. He's going to be discussing fiber differently, rewriting the rules of fiber deployment and adoption. So Joe's career has spanned 30 years with roles in Canada, US, India, and businesses in over 40 countries around the world. No matter the role, Joe has been an innovator, including his role as the founder and CEO of Rock Networks. With Joe's leadership, Rock Networks was recently ranked #1 as the fastest growing company list in Ottawa with a 3-year growth of over 5,000%. Joe has a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Memorial University in Newfoundland and an executive MBA from the University of Toronto. So with all that, welcome, Joe. And for our audience, please type your questions as we go, and we'll work them into discussions at the end. With that, I'll turn things over to Joe.
Thank you, Gary and David, and certainly a pleasure to be with everyone for breakfast. I hope everybody had their eggs and got their coffee in for this morning. So Rock Networks, the company that I founded in 2016, was recently acquired by a company out of Toronto, headquartered out of Toronto, called PomeGran. And PomeGran is primarily a fiber-centric player in the broadband marketplace in Canada, with some presence in the Northeast US as well. And so what we're going to talk about today is sort of an educational session, which these are, around how to think about fiber differently from a pre-planning, a deployment, and then post-deployment ramp in terms of adding subscribers to your network. So we'll just jump right into it. And as Gary said, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat and we'll try to address them. We'll present for about 17 or 18 minutes and then have about 8 minutes or so for Q&A at the end. Next slide. You can go to the next slide, David. Okay. So a few things we're going to talk about is strategic planning, looking at, example outputs of that strategic planning, how to overcome some deployment challenges, sort of a risk mitigation matrix. These slides will be available after, so I'm just going to touch on the risk mitigation, but basically we'll cover that off. And then talk about how to accelerate market entry and growth, and how by doing these things allows you to basically accelerate the profitability and time to market of your solution. And then we'll conclude with a couple of projects that are very significant that PomeGran has been working on in the Canadian market. Next slide. So if you think about fiber deployment, a lot of the work actually starts well in advance of actually doing the deployment. And a lot of these projects, like BEAD funding, in Canada, we have the Universal Broadband Fund and the Internet Connectivity Fund in the province of Ontario, so federal and state level funding, if you will. And we also bring in third-party project financiers. And so a lot of projects require third-party debt in order to, basically create a economic model that is successful. And when you think about these third-party debt providers, they look at these projects as a project financing model. So the first thing you need to be working on as you look to raise funds for your project is developing a very robust financial model. So some of the things that these project financiers and private equity firms, et cetera, look for is, a 20 to 30 year kind of time horizon. Fiber projects are, life expectancy of 30 plus years. The cost estimates need to be bottom up. With projects that we work on, we set the financial model such that there's automatic provisions as you go through the project for reserves. So major maintenance reserve account, or MMRA. You can't take equity out of the project until certain financial thresholds are reached. We call that debt service coverage ratios. And when you're building this financial model, you need flexibility and adaptability of the model. So multiple assumption inputs, multiple scenario analysis. And so you need what we call an Excel guru to work on this within your team. So I encourage you, if you're a community, somebody from the finance organization needs to be a significant part of the project team. And so the financial model that you start with becomes the ultimate basis that you track your performance to that budget, if you will, which is what the project financing folks do. From a high-level design perspective, we look at how to look at risk mitigation and partnerships. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And when you think about these investors, they have certain expectations. So they want a technology that is future-proof. So fiber obviously is the most future-proof. So Gary talked a little bit about reliable broadband. I look at it reliable and future-proof, and fiber is the only one that really meets that full test. And then obviously focus on scalable platforms. So, when you deploy your network, how can you add future customers as you move forward? Operational support systems, business support systems need to be an integral part of this. So we partner with certain companies in that space. And if you're a greenfield, which a lot of the BEAD funding may end up being greenfield type operations, this is a significant requirement for any operator to move into the market. And then I mentioned scenario analysis. So you got to have both downside risk analysis. So the project is a higher cost and takes longer to deploy. That has a big impact on the financials. And then you also have upside scenarios if you get to higher penetration rates that we'll talk about as well. Next slide. So the outputs of this financial model, this is the pretty pictures, but finance folks skim over the pretty pictures. This is more for the business folks, but they look for, what's your revenue ramp? When do you get the cash flow positive? So time to break even, if you will. If you're working with communities that are doing some investment, how do they get their return on investment? Then you look at your project debt financing. So when do you start repaying, and when is the repayment life cycle, the debt repayment curve, and then your subscriber ramp to get to your maximum penetration rate. So these are kind of outputs from the graphs or graphs of the financial model, but really the devil is in the details behind this. This is the high level output. Next slide. But just to give you an example. So when we move from the project planning phase to now we're moving into deployment, there's a new set of challenges. So you go from the high level design and you move into the detailed design. So there's a lot of tools available for this, advanced GIS models, companies like 3GIS, QGIS, ArcGIS, as well as LiDAR technologies. And we really like LiDAR because it enables us to create a digital twin and representation of the network. So these are kind of the best tools in the market. And as you're doing your detailed design, you should select design partners that are going to make use of all of these tools. Make ready applications. I always call this the long pole in the tent, because you're actually trying in an aerial deployment, you're trying to attach the poles. There's multiple pole owners, typically a utility company or a telco or other groups that own the poles. One project in Ontario, we have 3 different pole owners because of the large geography that we're deploying in. So these type of make ready applications are very specific. There's pole loading calculations, so tools like SpiderCalc are typically used in these, but your design firm has to be able to have these and have worked with, in my opinion, should have worked with the existing pole owners in the past. Finally, local communication, like local community engagement, is very important. So with our projects, we have some projects that have First Nation or tribal in the US is the term used, but First Nation or Indigenous communities duty to consult, which is a federal and provincial requirement in Canada. So we have to engage with them early to make sure that they approve the project for deployment in their territory. As well as municipal and zoning right-of-way approvals. So in some of our projects, we've established not-for-profit groups to help us with that local community engagement, because it's not just one community in our projects. One of our projects has over 60 communities that we're deploying through. And then from a innovative process, you got to adopt new technologies and methods to address those challenges. Some of these technologies, when we started our project, it was PON, then it became XGS PON, and now we're looking at 10 gig PON. And so, or 25 gig, sorry. So these kind of new technologies will always come to the fore, and so you always got to be looking for, your project plan is never a static document. It's always evolving as the market evolves. And we believe very much in a collaborative approach. So partners are the key to our success. But we typically will go for each of the layers from design to actual construction to, in our open access networks, the ISP side, we actually have multiple partners in each one of those layers. And we do that through a competitive RFP process, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that is a critical part of our approach to ensure time to market. The competitive RFP allows you to obviously do price negotiations, so that's one output. But we approach it where you get a certain amount of the project, and as you execute, you get more of the project. So this makes sure that our partners are very much attuned to our success as well. Next slide. The other thing is a risk management framework. So we spend a lot of time on this because ultimately the risk output is you're not on time and you're not on budget. And so there's many things that can get in the way of a successful project. I see Gary laughing in the background. So regulatory and permit delays. So sometimes crossing a stream or a railroad is the difference between your project being on time or not. So you need a backup plan, right? So in other projects, we've looked at railroad crossings and we do a temporary microwave shot of a 10 gig, right? So just to make sure that the project can continue, if you will. Weather delays. Hey, we work in northern Canada, so you know what that means in the October, November to April months. So significant weather delays. And then if you're in the southeast U.S. or the southern U.S. states, tornadoes and things like that. So that obviously you've got to ensure that weather delays, you have a workaround schedule, extra overtime, whatever. Technical challenges. So again, utilizing the advanced tools and working with multiple suppliers, material supply in the same stream. During COVID, as everybody knows, there was lots of delays. So having a multi-supplier environment was very critical in order to ensure that you could keep your project on track. A lot of stakeholder engagements required because in a lot of our projects, because of our duty to consult, if the communities are not on board, we're actually going to be delayed. Cost overruns, obviously, you need to track your project very closely. So that's the key risk management. And then, I talked earlier about looking at the latest, greatest technologies as your project moves because it never moves in the timeline that you'd like it to. So always be aware of new tech that can help. Next slide. So now we go to the third phase. So you've got your network, it's starting to be built, right? You're deploying, you're passing homes. So now you got to focus on the adoption curve. So let's talk a little bit about adoption strategies and how you can use technology and data-driven tools in order to accelerate market entry and growth. And basically what we do is we have targeted marketing, which we'll talk a little bit about, that aligns with the deployment schedule. So deploy as you build kind of model. We personalize the journey and for each of the users and make sure that we can drive faster adoption rates on that. And we have multiple channels to market and feedback loops for customers through multiple marketing channels. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. So we talk about rewriting the rules of deployment and adoption with PomeGran. So as you add all of these innovation tools, you end up getting a better deployment. So you deploy quicker at a lower cost structure. So that helps the business case. And we then apply that to our adoption. So customer-backed networks, designed to meet community needs, ties back to all the community engagement that you've done. We have a build and sell playbook. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And we think about fiber differently. So all of these innovative deployment challenges, traditional approaches. So an example of a technical challenge might be a distributed split architecture versus an optical tap architecture for deployment in very low density rural areas. And those are some of the things that we do. So our emphasis is always on quick to market, efficiency within the team, and we can't look at one single design and deployment approach. And the ultimate impact is that we're serving underserved urban and rural areas. It's a sustainable development or economic development model for local communities, and we're always challenging the status quo. So we take a startup approach, because we are one, to bridging the digital divide. Next slide. So on the marketing side, we have an integrated marketing campaign. So none of these things people haven't seen before. The question is how you tie it all together. So we do direct mail campaigns. We have a door knocker campaign. We work with local community level publications, so local newspapers, social media. A lot of people are on Facebook and community groups, and then PR strategy. And then we map our customer journey from initial engagement, because it's not a single touch to get the customer closed. You got to have multiple touch points throughout the buyer's journey. And we start as we build with pilot projects to test that we can get to the penetration rate that we're desiring. And then we tie the marketing back into the business model. So we have tracking, we have analytics, we have optimization tools. There's a feedback loop. So as we're signing up customers, are we getting the field team out to do the drop? Are we then getting the in-home installation? And then are we following up with the customer service call to the customer? And we also look at early adopter programs where certain customers can get a discount if they recommend other users on the network. So all of these items, anybody on the call is probably doing at some level. The key is you create a integrated team or a small cell, if you will, of marketing, service, deployment, procurement, that the team focuses on each fiber serving area and little pilots, 2 to 500 user kind of chunks. And basically, it's like a significant marketing effort for that little area. And then you do that area by area by area by area. And that's how you get to your adoption curve, if you will. Next slide. The examples in the marketing, by the way, are from our Quebec project. In Northern Ontario, we were recently announced an award of a contract that was 4.5 years into planning stage. So just to give you some time, why the pre-planning is important. And it's in Northern Ontario. So for our US attendees, the left-hand side is Sault Ste. Marie, so just north of Western Michigan, and Sudbury to the right, basically directly north of Toronto, including Manitoulin Island. So there's about 19,000 underserved homes in this area. We have a project that is valued at about 172 million Canadian, so about 125 million US. It is 100% fiber to the home project, and the homes per route kilometer, it's about 1,500 kilometers of deployment. So you're under 10 homes per route kilometer. So it's a very rural area. And the communities look at it primarily as an economic growth tool, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, because the state of the art internet in this area, other than some of the more urban areas, which has some coax cable, is basically DSL and 10 megabit wireless solution. So when you come in with a multi-gigabit wireless solution, it's game changing for these communities. Next slide. In Quebec, PomeGran a couple of years ago acquired a company called Digicom, and Digicom was the first wireless ISP in Quebec that they acquired, and they bid on a couple of the Quebec-based broadband funds, and we've won 2 projects. Phase 1 is about 722 kilometers of fiber backhaul. Again, it's for 4,000 homes, so again, a very rural kind of deployment. And we've got it in the Universal Broadband Fund. You have to deliver a speed of a minimum of 5010, which is a universal speed across Canada. So fixed wireless can meet these requirements. The US right now is 100/20, but we're deploying gigabit services to these communities. So the 5010 is a metric, but we don't look at that as what we're deploying for customers. And again, it comes down to digital inclusion. Some of these communities had 10 megabit fixed wireless or Wi-Fi services from Digicom, and now Digicom is saying, hey, we can give you gigabit fiber, right? Much more reliable technology. Next slide. So the key takeaways we see in writing the rules of fiber broadband is you got to build fast and on time. It seems intuitive, but harder done than said. You need to ramp quickly as you're building, you have to be connecting, and you have to have an integrated field team to marketing to sales engagement model, and always be engaging at the front end during the build and post build with your communities, because that's how you're going to address regulatory delays and get the ramp that you need for the project. When you do all of these things, build faster, on time, or under budget, you get to a desirable take rate. We believe that you can improve the value of your project by up to 2 times from a net present value financial model perspective. And these are the kind of, what we consider innovative. All of them as an individual line item are not innovative, but when you put them all together and you track it and you have these project-based teams that are very small cell focused, that's how you get the rewards at the end, which are, communities being connected, joining the digital economy, and ultimately creating an efficient financial model for your organization. With that, I'll open it up to questions.
No, Joe, this is dead on. I mean, we've seen that the faster you can build, the more you can be on time, the quicker. David, go back to that summary slide. But the quicker you can start servicing your debt and then be able to get better take rates. You know, one of the things in our Little Rock event, Render Networks did a great job of explaining how they really focused on community engagement, and we're out front to let with door hangers like you mentioned and others to let them know here's what's going to happen, this is when it's going to happen, and so when people when you start to deploy fiber down the street, they're not surprised and they're actually prepared. That seemed like a big part of your strategy is to
Yes.
really engage with that community and make them aware of what's going on and what to expect. Is that right?
Yep. 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 Fiber's coming to your area. Here's the benefits of fiber. Then somebody shows up, knocks on your door. Do we have authorization to do a drop to your home? Then somebody knocks on the door and says, are you interested in the service? We'll have a sales team, customer service follow up. And fiber, we're going to be building in your neighborhood in the next 2 weeks. Are you interested? Right. So, that's why I say there's multiple touch points to every single customer. Right?
So on your so Ron has a great question. So when you're talk about doing fiber differently, can you talk about what type of deployment and what have you changed? So, kind of lessons learned on so that people can have some better examples.
Yeah, so on the technology front, we don't deploy a single, centralized split architecture, just a traditional fiber deployment model, very ideal for, more dense environments. So we do lots of different cascaded deployments, optical tap, as appropriate for each fiber serving area. So you can have multiple technology deployments within the same footprint, if you will. If you're in the denser, 10, like let's say 50 homes per route mile or route kilometer, a centralized split might work. If you're in one home per route kilometer, which is low density, then you have to do things like an optical tap. So that's the deployment piece. And then on the ramp side, it is this integrated marketing approach. Create a team that all the functional elements of your organization are represented, create a team lead, and basically do it in groups of 200 to 500 homes in terms of going in and with a integrated campaign of all the functional organization elements to get to your ramp rate. What we've seen by doing that, I know we had a little question at the front end, and I don't know if we had the results of that poll yet. But we think we can get to pretty significant take rates, up to 50% within 1 year of deployment, and so that is achievable if you have this integrated small cell team approach.
Well, absolutely. That's certainly done differently and service your debt quicker. It certainly makes that project pay off much quicker. So Lou had to ask, in financial markets, there's tools to de-risk arbitrage. But in fiber deployment, are there any tools or markets that you can use to reduce risk for scarce resources, both physical and human?
So on the financing side, project-based financing that leverages institutional, like insurance companies or pension fund money, gives you lower cost debt, right? So that's one de-risk of your project. Resource constraints are everywhere, right? So this is where a multi-partner strategy, allowing them to compete against each other for more business, that is the key to managing those kind of things in our opinion. So.
Well, Joe, we have some more questions, so hopefully you can answer that afterwards. But I
Yeah.
want to thank you very much. We really appreciate your insights and contributions to really advancing our industry. And I love what you're doing in Canada. It's really important to make sure we hit the indigenous areas and make sure everybody's connected. And I want to thank everybody for getting together today and look forward to getting back together next Wednesday. I'll be in Kuala Lumpur and I'll be together with my good buddy Vincent Garnet, the Director General of Fiber to Home Europe. And we're going to be talking about the status of fiber in Europe and around the globe. So you're not going to want to miss that. So we'll see everybody next Wednesday. Thanks again, Joe. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks everyone for attending, and we'll follow up with the answers to the questions. Thank you.